Welcome to the Bean Pod, a podcast about decentralized finance and the Beanstalk protocol. I'm your host, Rex. Before we get started, we always want to remind everyone that on this podcast, we are very optimistic about decentralized finance in general and Beanstalk in particular. With that being said, 3 things. First, always do your own research before you invest in anything, especially what we talk about here on the show. Second, while you're doing that research, try to find as many well-developed, opposing viewpoints as possible to get the best overall picture. And third, never ever invest money that you can't afford to lose or at least be without for a while. And with that, on with the show. Cryptocurrency, and specifically decentralized finance, are currently going through the trough side of a hype cycle. As investors look for safe havens and liquidity is moved out of the space, so many of the pretty, shiny things that were so alluring even a year ago are starting to look like empty shells. Plenty of style, but not necessarily much substance. And as the market's thinned, it's become more and more apparent how important DeFi primitives really are. These core functions, projects, and products are fundamental to how the ecosystem works and, over time, how to make it work better. In our own project, Beanstalk, we see a positive carry token as the starting point for an endless number of transaction systems. Our friends at Tellor, a decentralized Oracle protocol, see their project as a way to provide data in a way that's transparent, permissionless, and censorship resistant. Their system of validators can be called on to obtain just about any type of information, and their challenge system provides the incentives and penalties that ensure that only the right data reaches an end user. For this episode, Maud and I were lucky enough to sit down with Nick Fett, Tellor's CTO. We talk about what the protocol does, why decentralized oracles are important, and how tricky it can be at times to determine truth in a trustless environment. Nick, great to have you.
Hey, great to be here.
And then we've got Maud back in the studio as well. Maud, always good to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Nick, just to kick us off, I'd like you to kind of set the stage a little bit, if you would. Could you kind of talk us through the history of price oracles and why they're important, and then walk us right into how Tellor fits into that general idea of decentralized price oracles?
Sure. Yeah, that's a huge question, I think. But to kind of give you the background, so the Oracle problem, so it actually, the first reference, we know this comes from, there was like a Reddit post on our Bitcoin back in 2014, and it referenced the Oracle problem. So like, how would you create like a decentralized prediction market? And somebody said, well, there's a problem of how do you actually find out the truth? And that sort of kickstarted discussions about, well, how do we have sort of decentralized truth in a way? A lot of the earlier designs, so there was like shelling coins, or what they would call, and they use kind of what's called like the shelling point in these auction-based systems to find truth in prediction markets. And that's what a lot of them were kind of focused on solving. Like, if you would ask it a question, so for instance, like, is Joe Biden the president of the United States? Then people would place bets on yes or no. And then at the end of the period, you would expect that as long as the majority of the participants are honest, then the yeses would have all of the money. And then if anybody did vote no, they would get their tokens removed and given to the yeses. And it was these kind of systems that like were the backbone or the start of the Oracle problem. But as you can guess, those were sort of very slow systems. And people have in a lot of ways been trying to find different solutions to the problem over the years. And this was actually so how Tellor kind of got started in this. Before I was doing Tellor, I was doing a decentralized derivative startup. So we were trying to do long and short tokens. So ones, you would have like a price feed, so like ETH US dollar, and you could have one token that represented the leveraged long and one that represented the short. This was actually a pretty novel idea back in 2017. And then we were, but I sort of ran headfirst into the Oracle problem as far as, well, how do you get a price feed, and how do you sort of get a price feed that's a little bit faster even than some of the other price feed oracles that were out there. This was, 2017, 2018. So this was before Chainlink had even launched. Back then, the only price oracle that was really live on Ethereum, there was Augur, which was a prediction market that used that shelling system. And then there was what was called Oracleize. They've since rebranded and are doing something different now. But back then, Oracleize was you would pay them like a quarter, and you would ask them to fetch an API value, and then this guy in London was running a server, and he would go and send you back the result to your smart contract, and that was like basically how smart contracts were grabbing Oracle data.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very decentralized.
No, but like we hadn't. People didn't really think through the Oracle problem yet. Now most people know the Oracle problem, but even up to like 2-3 years ago, it was very the Oracle problem was pretty nuanced. Not many people were thinking about it, especially in terms of price feeds. You had like people were sort of okay with the reputational based systems. That's like one way that people are solving it currently, and people have done it in the past is, I guess I can step back a bit. Like, what is the Oracle problem? And that's like, how do you find out the truth of something? So, in my derivatives contract example, if Maud and I are, say we wanted to do a smart contract that bets on the price of Bitcoin. So we each place some Ether into a smart contract, and if it goes up over this week, he gets all the ETH, and if it goes down, I get all the ETH. The question is, well, how do you resolve that? Who gets to say what the price of Bitcoin is at the end of the week? And you need a trusted oracle, if you will, to sort of provide that. And we could obviously choose you, Rex. Like, you could be the trusted oracle.
I often am.
Yeah, it would work, but the problem is that, okay, well, now that's this, centralized, trusted party, but
Sure.
that was the Oracleized model, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And then people went on, well, okay, so what's like V2 of that? And the answer is like, well, a multi-sig. So we can just have some trusted group of people that we whitelist, and they all get to sort of agree on what it is. And that's like, so like Maker is a whitelisted group of people, Chainlink is a whitelisted group of people. That V2 system is kind of like where a lot of the space is currently.
Mm-hmm.
Just these, you have a multi-sig and it controls who gets to say what the price is.
Mm-hmm.
And it can work, but then the question is as well, okay, so what are the farther designs? How can we actually make something that is actually decentralized? So it has some liveness guarantees. It has some properties that we would sort of attribute to a traditional decentralized system. And that's what we were trying to create with Tellor. So,
well, it seems like something like a multi-sig has its limitations. You were talking earlier about speed, and I would also say, yeah, I'm gonna use the term bandwidth, and I don't mean that in a technical sense. I mean that more in the idea of, if you've got individuals that are validating, a value or some type of data, there's only so much general bandwidth, that you can put in terms of stress on a multi-sig before you get past the point of something that's,
well, it's not necessarily like a multi-sig in the sense of like all transactions are flowing through one multi-sig. Like usually, like what it'll be is like one multi-sig or a group of people will like whitelist Oracle reporters.
gotcha, I see.
And then, like we hit this problem actually all the time with users. Is, I'm sure you guys see this in DeFi a lot. Like everyone wants price feeds faster. So like, how do you get
Yep.
super, super up to date and super fast price feeds? And the problem with oracles is that usually once somebody puts something on chain, you need a validation period. So how do you check, especially just in like a decentralized system, how do you check once it's put on chain, was it valid? That's how Tellor works. And we can say whether or not we need to push that off to a vote and determine whether or not we want to slash someone. But if you have like this whitelisted model or just the trusted model, there is no way to slash them or say that they were wrong, so you can just use it right away. So it actually leads to a backward sort of thinking about oracles, in that a lot of times these centralized systems can do things really, really fast, so they can just sign, price feeds, like, a data feed every second and push it on chain, and you can consume it every single second, because there's no way for them to be wrong. And even if there were, there's nothing you can do about it. So
Sure.
you just sort of consume it, and it's a very, very fast oracle. But then, you're not decentralized that anyway, and there's actually no way to decentralize that. So that's one of those things that, centralized oracles are better in some ways, because I often like to compare it to like an L1, in that, an L1 database will almost always be more performant. It basically will always be more performant than a blockchain. And there's just, comp sci reasons for that. And in the same way, a centralized oracle provider will most likely always be faster and more
Nick,
efficient.
in the whitelisted model, how are typically, people whitelisted?
Sure. Well, like Maker originally had, they had what were like secret whitelist, because they had said like, well, they didn't want to give away who these individuals were, because then you could go attack them in real life. So they had like a secret whitelist of people. And then recently they added, I guess not recently, but a few years ago now, they added where it was, some larger industry players. So, like other companies would have signers. And that's what you see kind of with Chainlink too. So Chainlink gets to choose who their whitelisters are, whether, they usually make them stake a certain amount. And then a lot of times they get big companies on board. So larger people with reputation that they want to be whitelisted. And that's sort of how you trust them. So usually it's usually just reputation based, whether that reputation comes from staking or from actually, having a big name in the space. That's kind of where it comes from. And then, usually a lot of these reputational based companies too. So Chainlink and probably most companies, who else uses like a whitelisted model? So like API3 does, where, their data providers are known as well. They have like off-chain agreements, so it's not like stuff that it doesn't have to be sort of handled on chain. You can have like go sign something that says you won't lie, and if you do, we're going to take you to court. That's like the traditional model for an oracle, and I mean there's something to say about that.
And so to kind of juxtapose that to Tellor, as I read through your information, what came to my mind was the almost, I hate to use the word traditional, because I feel like in cryptocurrency and DeFi, traditional seems like a little bit of an odd term. But I think of the, let's call it traditional hash validation process, where there's an opportunity to dispute. Want to walk us through Tellor's process, and is that kind of an accurate way of looking at Tellor's validation process?
Sure. In a way. I mean, in a way, we're kind of optimistic in that sense. But the earlier version of Tellor, so originally when we had launched Tellor, we had a proof of work component to it as well, to where in order to submit, you had to solve a proof of work challenge as well. So then there were disputes, but then there was even a proof of work component on top of it, which we were trying to make it more secure. But we've since moved past that. We had some issues with proof of work, like a lot of people. But the way that Tellor works now, so anybody can come. So Rex, Mod, you guys can stake some Tellor tokens, and then you're allowed to report prices. So somebody would come on and say, like in our example, what's the price of Bitcoin? And you guys would then basically race. So you would see, hey, the person that requested that is going to pay $5 to whoever puts the price of Bitcoin on. So you guys race to grab the price of Bitcoin from some sources and submit it on chain. Everybody can look at that value that was put on chain and dispute it. So you can say, hey, he lied, pay a small fee, and it goes to a vote. It gets taken off chain, and then the vote determines whether or not they lied. Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, nobody lies. So it's just the people can use that value whenever they deem they want to use it. Obviously, the caveat being they want to wait for people to check it and whether or not it's going to go to a dispute. But that's kind of the simple way that Tellor works. If anyone gets disputed, somebody else can step up and report the value and get the fee. and then there's no whitelists involved. There's no way to sort of shut it down. It just runs.
And it sounds like this process could really be used for really just about any type of off-chain data, right? I mean, it seems like the bounds are really only the needs of a potential user and the computing ability of the different validators.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're seeing. Originally, kind of most DeFi, most of the crypto space right now, it's basically just DeFi, and people want price feeds, but you're starting to see different kinds of requests. So whether it's, people want information about other chains. So you can think of bridges are basically oracles. They are oracles. So if you're a bridge on one chain, you want to read information about some external chain, you need somebody to pass the information on. And that's why, most bridges still are that V2. It's just like whitelisted, whitelists for who gets to push the data over. But if you want like a secure decentralized bridge, you would use a model similar to Tellor, to where you're grabbing information from other chains. But yeah, even things such as you can do things like off-chain computation. So if you had a problem, you could ask it to an oracle, and then the oracle providers could go do some off-chain computation and return it on chain. That's something else that Tellor could do, but you really don't see that kind of demand yet in most of the crypto space.
Sure, and that actually leads me to what I was going to ask you next. And so Tellor's been around, gone through a couple iterations, or let's say improvements. What do you see as the main use cases now in your current situation?
I would say bridges, and obviously price feeds still. People still just want a lot of price feeds. I think something that we're seeing a lot of people coming to us, it's just that they want to spin price feeds up quickly, or they want to spin information up quickly. And that's sort of one of the problems with the whitelisted providers, is they're relatively slow to sort of add a lot of new data feeds. So Tellor has a place kind of there for stepping in and adding them really quickly in a permissionless fashion. Similar to how you saw, I think you saw like decentralized exchanges really take off whenever people knew, okay, you can list any token here, because centralized exchanges had kind of shut down the listing process, as far as it was very, very expensive and it was hard to do. So then decentralized exchanges started to blossom because there were no permissions there. In that way, I think as more demands for oracles kind of pop up, the centralized oracle providers kind of won't be able to keep up, and that's whenever some of the decentralized ones will really start to take off.
Now, obviously, bridges have been in the news quite a bit, specifically because of security concerns. I mean, do you see tools like Tellor being able to help manage some of those security concerns, or is Tellor and decentralized oracles away from that problem?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely solves a lot of the problems, and you'll see it probably start to pop up here over the next year. One of the things that you have to get people to start accepting when it comes to bridges is just that they're slower. Right now people want really, really fast bridges, and the only way to really do really, really fast bridges is to have kind of that centralized layer of trust. If you would just like slow it down, you could sort of make a lot of things a little bit better. Same with like if you're going to use Tellor, it makes sense. You want to make sure that you slow the chain down, just because even Vitalik had posted like there were some issues with regarding Wormhole, which was Solana's. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of issues with really fast bridges because Ethereum, for instance, isn't final right away. Like you can roll the chain back, and it's expensive to do that, but it's not like unheard of expensive. So like if you deposited $100 million on Solana, traded it on a DEX for some other coin, and then it is significantly less than $100 million to roll back the Ethereum chain for an hour. And then you could simply do it. Say you never sent that money over to the Solana bridge, but you had already traded it away on the Solana side. So what happens? that was like a known attack vector. Vitalik had kind of posted about that. Obviously, that the wormhole bridge got hacked for another reason,
Sure. Yep. Yep.
just a smart contract bug. But
Yep.
that was something that people were saying, like, don't use these really, really fast bridges, because it even makes the main chain of Ethereum less safe whenever people are building these really fast bridges.
It seems like when it comes to bridges, you've got, and I didn't come up with this, but it came to mind as you were talking. You've got those like three variables of speed, security, and centralization, and you can like pick two.
Yeah, well, I think oracles are the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yep.
like the blockchain trilemma holds for like basically every app along the stack.
Yep.
And yeah, people are just starting to realize that. So, but you want your bridges to be nice and fast. So
Yeah. Well, I mean that seems to be the way that we move on to more efficient systems, and L2 is to figure out, however we can manage to get L1 and L2 working together well in terms of bridging. And that Oracle component, it seems like it's a really unique opportunity for both that and a lot of potential, legacy L1 solutions. I feel like I've read in some of your information, you use examples like insurance providers looking for weather feeds,
yeah,
or, I think about Beanstalk and the future um, operations and smart contracts we're looking to have built on top of Beanstalk, in the amount of outside information they'll use. That Oracle component that is well trusted and is relatively fast is going to be extremely important for some of those more unusual use cases.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, as you start wanting to actually make smart contracts useful and touch outside world information, like real world information, and make it relevant to normal people, like you need oracles, and that's kind of why we see them as a big thing going forward. And I know you guys do too. The cheesy weather example that everybody gives in basic smart contract class aside. But yeah, no, it's definitely something that we're working on. And I think one of the bigger challenges for oracles just going forward in this decentralized way is just how do you sort of source all that truth? How do you actually know what the weather feed is in certain areas of the world? And I think that's something that we're still excited to kind of explore.
Nick, I wanted to go back and ask a little bit on how Tellor works. So you have a group of validators, and then those who can also like check or dispute if the price is
Yep.
different. Can you summarize that back again to us?
Sure. Well, anybody can be a validator. So you just stake. Right now, it's 100 tokens, so it's like $1,500 on mainnet, and then you're allowed to be a validator. So you stake those tokens, and anybody can do it. You can, there's no limit to the number of people, and then anybody's allowed to be a disputer. So if you're a user, if you're just a casual token holder, usually the disputers are the other reporters themselves trying to gain a competitive advantage, because they're the ones that sort of monitor the system the most. But yeah, anybody can submit a dispute. So right now the dispute fee is 10 TRB, so it's like 1/10 the stake amount, and then they dispute it, and it would go to a voting process. So it gets kicked over to a voting process. The vote is split. So we have this kind of how the dispute resolution piece works, but it's split into four pieces. So 25% of the vote is the token holders, 25% is the reporters, 25% is the users, the people who are paying for requests, and then the last 25% is the team. So we give ourselves some, and we can throw it away at some point.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, the dispute is if I, as a validator, had reported a price, and then, for some reason my price wasn't the one picked, I can dispute it to, get back my staked tokens. Is that correct?
Wait, what do you mean?
So who disputes, and what are you disputing?
So you're just disputing the value. So like if you push the value of BTC USD, and you said it was $1 million, I would come and dispute that and say it's not $1 million.
Right, and then you take the staked tokens of whoever sent the $1 million.
Yep.
Right. Okay. What would it take to compromise such a system? So if we have 100 validators, what would it take, for eventually Tether to give out the wrong price?
Sure. So there's a few ways to break Tellor. So the way to really break Tellor, so like if you actually want to break it for good, what you would need to do is you would need to break that voting system that we had. So like you submitted a price of $1 million, I dispute it, and then you break the vote and say like, no, that's actually a good price, and you get your stake back, because the problem is then it would sort of reduce trust in the voting system in general. The other way to break Tellor is to sort of just censor it. So if you would basically, I would dispute you that it was $1 million, then I would post the correct price. So I don't know what's Bitcoin at today, whatever the correct price of Bitcoin is.
Yeah, 23-ish.
23-ish, yeah, and so I would post that on chain, and then the way that you could censor the Tellor system is you would just dispute that. So you would say, hey, that's wrong. Even though it's actually right, you could pay a fee and take it off chain, and then I would probably just put it on chain again because I know like I'm gonna get my stake passed back to me plus your dispute fee. It's a 2-day long vote for that to happen, so I'll just submit it again, probably restake and submit it again, and then you would just dispute that too, and then it would just turn into this system where hopefully like the game theory would say that more people would want to come in, stake Tellor, and start reporting a correct Bitcoin price, because in the event that you dispute them, they're going to get their money back in 2 days plus a nice hefty return. So that would be how it could sort of censor it, if you will. But those are kind of the only two ways that you can really break Tellor.
So when it comes to those voters, you said token holders, validators, users, and the team. So is that for checking a particular piece of data? Is that like a unanimous process? So if I'm a validator and I give an incorrect piece of data and it goes back for dispute and it's voted on by those 4 groups, do they have to completely agree, or is it some type of basic majority? Or
it's a basic majority, and there's multiple rounds too. So like you can, if you don't agree with the first round, you can kick it off to another round. And this was something we had some disagreements on, or not disagreements, but like discussion on early on. Because like what you can do is you can do like the shelling system to where like you slash people who vote not with the majority. So like I'm going to say that it was true, you're going to say it was false. And if more people say it was true, the other false people lose their tokens. But what we found with especially price feeds and a lot of these things is that it's really nuanced. Sometimes even saying like what a valid price isn't necessarily clear. Like in the price of the Bitcoin, if it's let's say it's 23,000. If I submitted 24,000, should I get slashed or disputed?
Yeah. Yep.
It's really, really hard. Sometimes yes. What if the price actually just jumped on a few exchanges up to 24,000? Is that good? So we're allowed to vote. You can either vote to where you slash the person, to where you don't slash the person and give them the dispute fee, or to where everybody just kind of gets their money back. And in the past, we've had examples of just where like, listen, we're just going to give everybody their money back. Like, let's just check our API feeds from now on. Like, it wasn't an attack. It was just like there was somebody was using certain APIs and another person was using another API, and they just disagreed.
Sure. And that's a thought that passed through my mind as you were talking earlier, is that there are times when, especially coin prices, such a good example. If you are using different systems, and we've had this discussion inside of Beanstalk a number of times, what's the best price feed for ETH? Yeah. And you ask 10 people and you'll get 12 different answers. And I'm sure that's a common issue, especially when there's a lot of, let's say, like A, sensitivity in a given piece of data, and maybe B, like high rate of change.
Yeah. Well, it's so like with Tellor, we actually let you specify the granularity level of the price feed. So sometimes users will be okay with, like you can say like, I want the ETH price. That's actually different than I want the ETH price according to the Coinbase API.
Sure.
Those are two completely different things, because some people might want according to these two APIs, and then it's actually a whole lot easier to say what a valid dispute is. Were these valid API queries, and you can sort of prove that. The problem comes in, however, that if you're only using a handful of APIs, now you're actually really easily censored, because those API providers could easily shut you down if they knew what was going on. So if you wanted, say, a more robust price feed, you could say something like, I just want a valid ETH US dollar price. Doesn't matter where you get it from. And now obviously that means the reporters can get it from any API they want, or they can even manually go look at a website. But you're not going to get sort of as tight of a range. So, there probably has to be a little bit more, variability in the accepted answer, and you kind of leave it up to the dispute process to handle what that valid range is. So there's pros and cons to both. It's just kind of up to the user to determine what they can handle.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we were talking about the tension between speed, security, and centralization before. It almost seems like in this case, there's a tension between like specificity and censorability.
Yeah, no, we have it like we have a whole like series on subjectivity and price oracles, and
sure, yeah,
and how ambiguous you allow your data to be is actually more censorship resistant.
Yeah, I never even thought about that, but it's a great point. And yeah, maybe it may make your data feed more vulnerable to dispute between validators, but just like you said, it makes it less censorship resist, or it makes it more censorship resistant externally.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, this is like we always push back on Chainlink because they always like to brag about they allow trusted data feeds. So, like paid APIs and things that they can use. And we're like, well, that's actually a really negative thing. You guys don't want to do that, like, and publish which trusted data feeds you're using. So
yeah, incentives can be very much a two-way street or a double-edged sword.
Sure. Yeah. It's but anyway, that's definitely watch it whenever you're picking your price feeds and pick which ones. I think some of the other pieces come in, even when you're not price feeds, like when you're talking bridges, there's the whole finality issue. There's the whole, are your reporters running nodes over there? How do you know if that's not being attacked? There's a whole bunch of issues too.
Nick, I'm thinking out loud here, and I'm wondering if this is already, done in some way. And we reverse the way that the price oracle is working. So let's say that we're interested in the price of 3 curve, and what we would do is that we would start with the assumption that the price of 3 curve is always equal $1, and we would be a validator and always push that the price of 3 curve is $1. And once it gets disputed, this is when we know that the price has changed, and it's not equal 1 anymore. Does that make sense? Because something like that be used in this way?
Yeah, for sure. You would definitely just want, like, a lot of times people will use Tellor as like the fallback in that sense. So like you could just have like, a lot of times when people come to us and they're like, hey, we want really fast price updates, basically with every block, and we're like, A, you can't afford that, neither can we, to push that many times. But what we tell them to do is like, you can actually use like the Uniswap price for a given pool, and then just use the Tellor as a fallback, to where the Uniswap price has to be within 2% of the Tellor value. So then you can use it, but we update the Tellor value. Say we'll update it if there's a 1% change in the price, and then as long as the Uniswap price is relatively within there, we know that it's not being attacked, and you can use it all on chain. But yeah, you can definitely do things like that, where you would just assume that it's $1 and then have Tellor push it on and able to like override that in some way.
That almost seems like it's a security feature, or could be used as a security feature for some type of unplanned change to any type of data feed that may have, your point may start as, internal to a particular protocol or project. If you use Tellor as your backup, you might be able to detect unwanted or unexpected changes, right?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, that's like I tell people, like, the Uniswap price feeds, for instance, are normally, for most things, they're really great. As long as you don't have a whole lot of value in your system, and the Uniswap pool has some liquidity, it works just fine. Nobody's going to throw the Uniswap pool to mess up your system. But if the liquidity on the Uniswap pool goes down, or if Uniswap upgrades to a new contract and all the liquidity leaves, then you're stuck without an oracle. So then you might want to listen to the Tellor price, which isn't going to change.
Sure. So another thing that was spinning around in my mind getting ready to talk with you is zero knowledge proofs. And, when I think about Tellor's ability to tell me a thing using its own internal set of validators, I mean, I feel like it's a relatively quick jump to zero knowledge proofs. I mean, is that something that Tellor is considering, has considered, is on your radar, or what do you think about zero knowledge proofs in Tellor?
Yeah, I mean, we're still trying to find a way to use them for, like, every data push, or if there is a way to use it for that. The question is always, like, why are you keeping it a secret, and do you need to keep it a secret?
Sure.
So, I don't know. There's actually, we're working with a cool system to do where you would do, like, zero knowledge commitments on one chain, and then you can pass them to another chain, which isn't necessarily Tellor using zero knowledge proofs, but sort of Tellor involved in the process, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, we haven't really found. Some people are doing things with zero knowledge proofs as far as, like, random numbers, so you can sign it and then reveal it later. But it's definitely something that we want to explore more. I personally have just gotten into it probably over the last 6 months. I've been building with a lot of zero knowledge libraries just for fun.
Nice.
Now, I was going to ask Nick, like, what challenges is Tellor, facing today, and where do you see, price oracles in general going in the future, or which direction do you think it is?
Sure. Well, I think some of the challenges that we face today, it's, kind of like I was talking a lot about trying to find the right users. Getting actual users in the space is really tough. Obviously, just because I think a lot of times people overestimate the total number of users in the space. There's, like, not thousands of them. And then the other thing too, it's, we have, people have gotten used to, whether it's, like, Chainlink's fault or just the fault of using centralized oracles, it's like people are used to kind of really fast oracles or on-demand oracles, to where you just throw a price on chain and then you can use it instantly. Well, that's, kind of like we were talking about. We want people to sort of slow down some of these applications, and that'll make it good. And then also just having to pay for oracles. So, every time, like, we're relatively cheap to push. It's like 300,000 gas to push a Tellor value on chain. But on mainnet Ethereum, especially during, like, high times, like, that can be $10, $20 a push. So if you want price updates every 5 minutes, and it's going to cost you $20, it can get relatively expensive pretty quick for your protocol. And a lot of times people are just not used to paying at all for Oracle data. They're trying to teach people that, oracles cost money, and then there's some of these things about just being slow and using it whenever you, in a smart fashion. As far as where I think price oracles and oracles in general are going in the future, I think we're just at this stage where we're starting to see real decentralized oracles come about. People are starting to realize that, okay, we can actually have decentralized price feeds, and even just people worrying about oracles is huge compared to where we were 3 years ago. The fact that I'm talking about price oracles on a podcast is awesome. But then I think, getting rid of a lot of these multi-sig pieces, as people start realizing that those are bad ideas, there will be things. What I'm hoping to kind of make Tellor into is that kind of like the protocol, if you will, for oracles. In the same way, like Uniswap, in a lot of ways, it's on chain, it's unchangeable, and people can just use it. That's kind of my vision and how I hope Tellor will work. There's not really a whole lot of kind of fluff involved in a lot of these other pieces. It still seems like really sort of early on, and there's like a lot of governance and a lot of changes and a lot of just wool over the eyes about how the system actually works. But ideally, we just like simplify it. It works. The limitations. How to break it. But this is it. This is how you have to use it. Go deal with it.
I feel like that's when we look beyond, folks in the DeFi space just trying to look to make money or whatever. When we actually look at different groups and projects that are trying to build, let's call them like DeFi primitives, I feel like that is a place where Tellor and Beanstalk are very similar in that like the goal is to come up with a system that is really a springboard for other systems. For Beanstalk, we want to build a financial system that's a springboard for all kinds of other systems that can leverage positive carry. Seems like for Tellor, you want to build a protocol that is a springboard for all kinds of other applications that need reliable, decentralized information that they can trust.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of like why we all got into it. It's you're building these things to, smart contracts and all these primitives and protocols are supposed to sort of remove the middlemen in the system. So, obviously, like an oracle is like the definition of like a middleman in like the original Bitcoin contract we were talking about. Like that is the middleman, but how do you remove the middleman and make it sort of non-extractive in as much way as possible? How do you make financial contracts that don't have somebody actually making money off of it?
I mean, that's it. And there's almost a difference between saying, even the term middleman, if you can create a middle, it's in the middle, but it's not a man. It may be an intermediary, but it's decentralized and trustless and censorship resistant. That's the goal.
Yeah, and that's like we've changed even a lot of our mindset over Tellor over the past few years. Originally, like we've stripped away a lot of. Originally, we were thinking DAO, everything as a DAO, and we've stripped almost every voting piece out of the system because we saw it as a risk for other protocols. The more pieces that we're allowed to vote on, the more we could potentially screw up your price feed. So like, how can we strip that out and just make it as much of like an immutable smart contract? Obviously, we have to vote on the disputes, but other than that, like it's all gone, and that's something that we're proud of. Like, we want it to be there, and it just sort of works. There's not even a DAO that's extracting rent and making money off of this. It's just the smart contract.
Beauty in the simplicity.
Right.
Well, Mad, you have anything else? You took my good ending question about what do you see as the future. What else you got, Mad?
That's it from my side. This has been very informative, Nick.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, so Nick, what I'll do is I'll just hand over to you. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave us with?
No, I think if you guys are interested in learning more about Tellor, there's Tellor.io is our website. Happy to just kind of anytime talk over Oracle designs. Just definitely, it's great that you guys are thinking about it. Just the more that we can educate people to actually think about the Oracle problem, and whether it's how do you wait for data in a safe manner versus what should the data be, that whole subjectivity discussion. There are a lot of hard questions without really right answers. So, happy to talk it over with any users in the Oracle space or DeFi space.
Perfect. Yeah, this is great. Nick, thank you so much.
No, thanks for having me. Excited to hear it live. So,
oh man, we're
Thank you, Nick.
Getting close.
All right.
As Nick said, you can find out more about Tellor by heading to their website at Tellor.io. That's TELLOR.io. You can also find them on Twitter at Tellor and on YouTube. The Bean Pod is a production of Beanstalk Farms, a decentralized autonomous organization. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Medium, Discord, and our home on the web at bean.money. You can also find me on Twitter at RexTheBean. And as a final reminder, this podcast is not financial advice. Thanks again for listening.